Tonight, chaos and confusion for Canada as the threat of tariffs looms.
We're always ready to talk.
A new report suggests Donald Trump wants to renegotiate the free trade agreement.
Let's be unsurprised by the surprises.
As Ottawa vows to weather the unpredictability. January 6th, rioters walk free.
Power of prayer is a very strong thing.
Leaving officers who were attacked shocked.
I've been betrayed by my country.
Trump's controversial pardons. And a pastor's personal plea directly to the president.
I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now.
Trump's reaction to the surprising sermon.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. On the first full day of his new presidency, Donald Trump is facing swift pushback on some of his key policies as he barrels ahead with his plan to kickstart what he calls the golden age of America. Now, already, some of his executive orders are being legally challenged, nearly 24 states suing to block his aim to end birthright citizenship. That as newly pardoned January 6th prisoners taste freedom, and Canada prepares to hit back if his tariff threat is realized. And on that front, some U.S. media reports are pointing to a potential motive, suggesting Trump's threat to hit Canada with a 25% tariff is really all about the free trade agreement. Ashley Burke now with Canada's response.
As ministers packed up to leave their two-day cabinet retreat focused on the new U.S. administration, more confusion from Donald Trump.
Listen, there's been a lot of things being said in the last few hours, I would say, but what I can say is that as Canadians, we always should be ready.
The Wall Street Journal reporting Trump is using the threat of tariffs as leverage to force an early renegotiation of the free trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
We negotiated a review in 2026. That's part of the negotiations. It's a review, and it'll happen, and we're always ready to talk.
The Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement was negotiated during Trump's first term in office. In a late afternoon press conference, Trump dismissed the report.
Not on U.S., it has nothing to do with that. They've allowed, both of them, Canada very much so, they've allowed millions and millions of people to come into our country that shouldn't be here.
It's the latest trade bombshell from the newly re-elected U.S. president.
Mr. Trump, the president, is a very, very good negotiator, and part of the negotiating tactic is to, keep your opponents on their toes, and I think that this certainly is, because I am learning about it from all of you.
It all shows just how chaotic the next 4 years could be.
This is stuff that's not going to end with any one negotiation tactic or any one series of back and forth or travel to Mar-a-Lago. Let's be unsurprised by the surprises.
As the federal government tries to make sense of it all and avoid U.S. tariffs, it's also vowing to retaliate if Trump doesn't back down.
I support the principle of dollar for dollar matching tariffs. It's something that we are absolutely going to be looking at if that is how they move forward.
But right now, everything's still up in the air. Trump now says he could impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada by February 1st, but an executive order he signed said he wanted a study on trade relations by April 1st. So it's not clear what the real deadline is or if there even is one.
Okay, good point. And Ashley, Canada is also trying to position itself as a help for Trump's agenda.
Yeah, Adrian, Canada's industry minister today said he was sending that message to American governors in Washington, telling them that if Trump really wants to usher in what he calls a golden age of America with a booming economy, that he needs to partner with Canada because it has the natural resources he needs to make it happen.
All right, Ashley Burke at Montebello, Quebec. In about 20 minutes, I will speak with former Conservative Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird about what Canada's approach could be between now and February 1st. Well, Donald Trump is defending his decision tonight to issue a sweeping pardon to some 1,600 rioters for the January 6th attack on the Capitol, some already back on the streets. As Katie Simpson shows us, the releases are sparking chaotic scenes outside of prisons. And a warning, the story does contain some strong language.
Still wearing his orange prison-issued shoes, William Sarsfield is among the first of the January 6th rioters to be freed.
Power of prayer is a very strong thing. When I looked out the window and seen my girlfriend with my truck with the flag in the back of it sitting on the side of the road with a bunch of other people that were there to pick us up, it was all part of God's plan, and he only knew the timing.
Sarsfield was in this crowd at the Capitol, convicted on multiple felony and misdemeanor counts, including for violent offenses. Now that he's out, he plans to return home to Texas.
Relaxation without the feds over my butt.
When you hear people who are critical of Donald Trump's decision to pardon people convicted of these crimes, what do you say to them?
I say that's a felon's act. I mean, he is our president. It's his choice.
It's a surreal scene outside the D.C. jail where offenders are being released, drawing members of the alt-right militia, the Proud Boys.
We're going to see our brothers come out today. Back to freedom, back to dignity.
That our flag was still there. And then there's Trump supporters so excited they spontaneously burst into song. All while people living in a nearby apartment scream expletives at the show below.
So this is January 6th.
The president pardoned roughly 1,600 offenders and commuted the sentences of more than a dozen people, including the leader of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers.
I've been betrayed by my country.
Former police officer Michael Fanone was severely beaten and tased during the riot. He fears his attackers will now seek revenge.
My only thoughts are for the safety of my family and myself.
Trump is defending his decision, saying these convictions ruined the lives of rioters, while also trying to argue he doesn't condone violence against police. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
While those scenes played out, Trump himself was pushing ahead with the rest of his agenda. Paul Hunter takes us through his first full day on the job, including the message sent directly to him from the pulpit.
Inside Washington's National Cathedral, beginning the first full day of Donald Trump's return to the presidency, the traditional inaugural prayer service.
As a country, we have gathered this morning.
And in a place rarely used for politics, Trump was taken on directly.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President.
With he and his family watching came specific reference to gay and transgender people and undocumented migrants at a time Trump has pledged mass deportations.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. The vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
Trump gave no visible reaction, though
Mr. President, what did you think of the sermon?
Later underlining for reporters.
Not too exciting, was it? I didn't think it was a good service, no. Thank you very much.
For Trump, the pushback then continued. A day after, he suggested again that he's interested in retaking control of the Panama Canal. Panama sent a letter to alert the United Nations.
Muy buenos días.
While Mexico's president underlined in her country that body of water to the east will always be the Gulf of Mexico, not, as Trump asserts, the Gulf of America, adding,
First of all, I would like to assure the people of Mexico that we will always defend our sovereignty and our independence.
Thank you.
Then, late in the day, flanked by three big tech CEOs, this word of a new public-private partnership here to be known as Stargate, with investments up to $500 billion aimed at supercharging growth in artificial intelligence.
To announce the largest AI infrastructure project by far in history, and it's all taking place right here in America.
Said Trump on that, besides boosting AI, it'll create 100,000 jobs immediately, Adrian.
And Paul, I'm thinking back to last night when Donald Trump found that letter in the White House left for him by Joe Biden. I would imagine by now he's opened it and read it.
Yeah, and he was asked about it today. Yeah, he has opened it. He said the letter begins, "Dear 47, Trump's now the 47th president, right? He didn't read the letter out to reporters, but did say it was an inspirational letter encouraging Trump to do a good job because it's an important job, said Biden. Trump called it a nice letter from Joe Biden and said he appreciated it.
All right, Paul Hunter in Washington. And more pushback against Trump's agenda tonight on immigration. The White House says deportations are now underway. And as Richard Madden tells us, lawsuits have already been launched.
Protests erupting across the U.S. as President Donald Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown begins, from tightening the border to mass deportations. This woman is worried about her family.
I can't imagine losing my parents. It's difficult to even think about. I didn't want to think about it because if I were to lose my parents due to deportation, my whole world would fall apart.
Trump signed 10 executive orders on immigration, some already in effect, including declaring a national emergency at the southern border that lets him authorize the military to enforce it. But in this busy border town of McAllen, Texas, there is no visible show of force, no troops on the ground, although giant floating barriers were reinstalled in the Rio Grande to prevent crossings. The White House says deportations are already underway, with agents first targeting those on parole, in custody, or wanted by police.
Target enforcement operations, they know exactly who they're looking for. They know pretty much where they'll find them.
Sanctuary cities like Chicago is apparently a main target, but its governor says the White House refuses to share its plans.
Frankly, I think this is indicative of what you're going to see from the Trump administration for the next 4 years. It's chaos.
Illinois also joins nearly 24 other blue states in a lawsuit challenging Trump's order to end birthright citizenship, protected by the Constitution, that guarantees citizenship to anyone born in the U.S., regardless of their parents' status.
The executive order renders many children born on American soil without citizenship, creating for the first time a class of American-born children whose health and well-being are threatened by their own government.
But Trump's aggressive actions aren't stopping a new caravan of some 2,000 migrants from southern Mexico, reportedly headed north. And Trump has also vowed to restart construction of the border wall all along the southern border, reviving a massive multi-billion-dollar project scrapped by his predecessor. Adrian.
So, Richard, what else do we know about these planned mass deportations?
Yeah, Homeland Security confirming tonight that federal agents can arrest people in schools and churches where many migrants are known to shelter. This is a break from a long-standing policy to avoid so-called sensitive areas, but Homeland Security says this new policy is now underway.
All right, Richard Madden tonight at the southern U.S. border in Texas. And the first of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees has been sworn in. Florida Senator Marco Rubio is now Secretary of State.
President Trump's made it very clear, everything we do, and this is true in government, but especially at the Department of State, everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us more prosperous? If it doesn't do one of those three things, we will not do it.
He said another foreign policy goal under Donald Trump will be the promotion of peace. Well, back in Canada, Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney was endorsed today by some high-profile MPs.
When I chat with folks around home, or frankly, in any part of the country, they tell me that they're pretty frustrated because they do not want to elect Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister. Well, my answer is Mark Carney.
He's the right person to help bring us into the next phase of our work to support Canadians, to build a strong economy and to fight climate change.
Minister of Indigenous Services Patty Hajdu also endorsed Carney today, saying he understands the challenges for Canadians. Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton is here to dig a little deeper into that with us. So, Rosie, what's your sense of what people should make of those endorsements for Mark Carney today?
Adrian, in terms of numbers of endorsements, Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland are pretty evenly split inside the Liberal caucus, though Carney has more cabinet support. Freeland has picked up names like Justice Minister Arif Virani, BC Minister Terry Beach. Endorsements can make a difference in terms of gathering support inside a riding, but when it comes to the weight of the endorsements, Carney has picked up some significant MPs and cabinet ministers who should be able to help when it comes to political organizing, like Sean Fraser and Melanie Joly. And then, as you mentioned today, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault.
So on that point, I gather there's an interesting development there with him as well.
There sure is. There's been a rather remarkable change in position from him. He has been really the staunchest supporter of the consumer carbon tax up until now. He now says he's open to getting rid of it, that he thinks it's still a good tool for lowering emissions, but there's other ways to do it, namely the industrial price on carbon. That is a significant shift and not a coincidence. Mark Carney has also said Canada needs a different tool to reduce emissions, as has Chrystia Freeland. Pierre Poilievre wanted to win a carbon tax election, but he now seems to have won the political argument about the tax, and his Liberal opponents are doing everything they can to distance themselves from this unpopular measure.
Indeed. Rosemary Barton in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks.
Canada's inflation rate dipped last month, and Statistics Canada is crediting the federal tax holiday. So it fell slightly to 1.8% in December, down from 1.9% in November. The 2-month tax break covers a range of goods, including beer, wine, restaurant meals, and children's clothing, and it ends in mid-February. To the Middle East now, where a major Israeli military operation in the occupied West Bank has killed at least 10 Palestinians. Israel's prime minister said the move is to defeat terrorism. Chris Brown is in the West Bank tonight, where there are deep concerns about the violence and the timing.
No sooner did the ceasefire in Gaza kick in than Israel's military pivoted to Jenin in the occupied West Bank, launching what it called Operation Iron Wall, with a big military presence in the streets to target what it calls terrorist infrastructure. Fadi al-Sadi says his brother was shopping for bread when out of nowhere he was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. Jenin and its refugee camp are seen as a stronghold of armed groups aligned with Iran. Palestinian security forces have also battled them, but Israel warned its attack will be extensive. Not far away, Monday night, Jewish settlers attacked other Palestinian communities. It came just hours after Donald Trump removed sanctions the Biden administration had placed on violent settlers. With the fighting in Gaza paused, the fear of many Palestinians is that some in Israel's government are seeking to resume the war here in the West Bank. We spoke to top Palestinian official Ahmed Majdalani as the Israeli attacks on Jenin were unfolding. Israel's main goal is to create chaos that will weaken the Palestinian Authority, he says. The PA and Hamas are bitter rivals, both seeking to run post-war Gaza, but Israel says it will accept neither, without suggesting other options. That ceasefire not only freed 3 Israeli women hostages in Gaza, it also freed 90 Palestinians from Israeli jails, including activist Bushra al-Tawi. She spent 10 months incarcerated without being charged. She says Israel's Jenin operation is about weakening Palestinian resolve. The Palestinian people are always under fire, being prosecuted or detained, she says. You do not want to submit. The Israeli raid on Jenin has effectively paralyzed the region, with checkpoints snarling traffic. Hamas issued a statement urging Palestinians to escalate their fight as the risk of yet more violence soars. Chris Brown, CBC News in Ramallah.
Dozens of people have been killed in Turkey after a ski resort fire in the middle of school break. Some even forced to leap from their windows. A boil water advisory in Halifax forces the postponement of critical surgeries.
I just want to get it done and over with.
How that water became unsafe. And a real-life wild goose chase.
I've been following them for about 7 months.
We're back at 2. Garth Hudson, the last founding member of legendary roots rock group The Band, has died. Born in Windsor, Ontario, the classically trained Hudson was widely hailed as one of the greatest rock keyboardists. He also played horns for the band. Hudson died in his sleep this morning at the age of 87. Well, a major fire in Orillia, Ontario has destroyed a heritage building. It happened in the city's downtown core, spreading to several units of this multi-complex building. Businesses and residential units have been destroyed. No injuries have been reported, but fire officials say the building is likely a total loss. And Turkey's president has declared Wednesday a national day of mourning for the victims of a deadly fire at a busy ski resort. At least 76 people have been killed, more than 50 injured. Margaret Evans now with the frantic efforts to get to safety.
The fire began in darkness when most in the 12-story hotel would have been sleeping. Some survivors saying they were woken not by fire alarms, but by people shouting. The flames spread quickly. By morning, some of the upper floors were still on fire, and witnesses were trying to come to terms with what they'd seen. Omer Sakrak, who works at a nearby hotel, says it took a long time for fire trucks to arrive. During that time, people started to jump in panic, he says. There was nothing we could do. We just watched people jump like that. Others tied bed sheets together in the hopes of escaping. Mevlut Ozer, another hotel worker, describes it as an apocalypse. There were some extra beds on the first floor, he says, so we threw those down so people would fall on soft ground if they jumped. We saw people on the higher floors. All we could do was cry. The hotel is situated in a popular ski resort in Turkey's Bolu Mountains, and the fire has come in the middle of school holidays. Turkish authorities say there were 238 registered guests. An investigation is now underway, according to the tourism minister Mehmet Nuri Ersoy. There had been no report of fire safety concerns at the hotel before now, he says. Turkey has had a poor record of enforcing building safety codes in the past. 4 individuals, including the owner of the hotel, have reportedly been detained. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
A Harper-era foreign affairs minister is weighing in on how to handle Donald Trump.
I think we'd be better off to drop the idea that you're going to convince them that tariffs are a bad thing.
How John Baird says Canada can win the president over. And Donald Trump has been talking tough about the Panama Canal.
They don't treat us fairly. They violated every aspect of the agreement.
But do his words have any bite? The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next. Historic snowfall is burying parts of the U.S. Gulf Coast, and what's being called a once-in-a-generation winter storm from Texas to Alabama. Unprecedented blizzard warnings have been issued as heavy snow and strong winds force road closures and the cancellation of thousands of flights.
Are you cold right now?
Oh, yes, I'm freezing.
And a mass of frigid air dropping down from the Arctic has forced officials to issue extreme cold weather alerts throughout central Canada. In some places, winds are making it feel colder than -40, and that deep freeze is expected to last until later in the week. Some 200,000 people in the Halifax area are under a boil water advisory tonight. For many, it's the second time in 6 months. As Kayla Hounsel reports, it's not only frustrating residents, it's putting more than 100 surgical procedures on hold.
Chef Andy Thompson started the day not cooking, but shopping for bottled water, cans of pop, and bags of ice. A boil water advisory is affecting more than 200,000 customers in the Halifax area after a planned power outage.
It's become frustrating because this is the second time in 6 months where we've had a boil water advisory for the area.
The last time, in July, caused widespread disruption. Halifax Water says a system to prevent this kind of thing is now days away, but that didn't help Monday night.
The generators came back on, everything was working properly, and then when the power returned to the facility, there was a blip or a blown fuse and the power was off.
And that meant at this facility, the last step to treat the water, adding chlorine, didn't happen. People scrambled for bottled water, dozens of schools shut down fountains, and the health authority is rescheduling 145 surgical procedures.
I was nervous. I just want to get it done and over with.
This couple came from Cape Breton for him to have a surgery for lung cancer.
It's sad to say that we have to put it off a few more days, but it's all in God's plan, really. Like, there's nothing we could do.
Some say it's important to keep things in perspective. There are 31 long-time drinking water advisories in Indigenous communities in Canada.
I do understand the difference between our community and some others, and we're fortunate to be in a place where they can fix this quickly.
The advisory is expected to be in place roughly 2 days. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Donald Trump's claim to the Panama Canal.
We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
We'll break down what he can actually do. But first,
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada.
Donald Trump's latest tariff threat, same percentage, possible new deadline. So how should Canada respond? Former Conservative Party Cabinet Minister John Baird has some ideas. There are about 10 days, roughly, between now and when Donald Trump intimated that these tariffs are possibly coming. What's your sense of what the most important things you think need to happen are between now and then?
I think we need to show the president that Canada's taking these threats seriously and taking the concerns that he have with border, the drugs, and defense spending and other things seriously.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm aware that there are still some people who maybe don't take it seriously, who say, well, this is just the way he talks, off the cuff at news conferences. There's nothing firm. It's not going to happen. What do you say to them? My best advice is to take the president seriously, but not necessarily literally. I think we dodged a bullet. The fact that on his day one, when he had 200 executive orders that he didn't put the tariffs on. What I think we need to see over the next 10 days is show her clamping down on the border to stop illegal border crossings coming from Canada to the United States, which reached 189,000 last year alone, and to get tough on fentanyl. There's as many as 5 or 10 fentanyl labs in Canada, where our biggest export market is to the United States, and show some action. In terms of action, the Prime Minister said this afternoon that he supports, when we're talking about tariffs here, dollar for dollar tariffs. What does that look like? I think you want to think of what is the most effective response, not necessarily what is the most vindictive response. One of the concerns that I would have is that what if you brought in a 5% tariff and then said, if you retaliate, I'll bring it to 10%. So to think we should probably be playing chess here and not checkers. But obviously there has to be some sort of response from Canadians. So as we talk strategy here, I'm aware that there might be some people who are saying, I wonder if John Baird is by any chance advising perhaps Pierre Poilievre on this or anything else, like just in the name of disclosure here. Sure, I give advice to anyone who asks. I met with the U.S. Consul General to Toronto earlier today. For example, I talked to a lot of people in corporate Canada as well as people in the Conservative Party. So that's not a no to advising Pierre Poilievre, particularly on this file, or others? Sure, I talk to Pierre from time to time, but I have no official role. Okay. I'm curious, when you talk about a unified approach, being serious about this, can we talk about the possible cracks in the notion of Team Canada? Alberta being the only province not entirely signing on. How do you think Canadians should regard that crack? Is that a big deal? Is it seismic, or is it not? At the end of the day, the responsibility for the relationship rests on the shoulder of the Prime Minister, and he doesn't even have, the support of his own Deputy Prime Minister, the support of his own party, let alone the support of the majority of Canadians. So that makes it completely different last time. Donald Trump is at the height of his political power and influence, and unfortunately, our leadership in Canada is at the exact opposite. I think we've got to think of the national unity of the country, and to simply say, well, we'll put an export tax on Alberta oil. Something that we would never do if it was Ontario manufacturing or Quebec hydroelectricity. You can't single out one province for punishment. And I think that's the concern that Albertans have, that this will be somehow a national energy program part two. Is it for someone like Donald Trump who's negotiating, what kind of interesting thing is it to see arguments happening within the family in Canada? Like, what position does that give him?
I think the fact that he's in a very strong position, he comes back to the White House stronger, smarter, much more experienced, much more dismissive of conventional wisdom. I think we'd be better off to drop the idea that you're going to convince him that tariffs are a bad thing. Yeah, he thinks they're a good thing. I think you've got to promote the areas where we can be good partners. That's like border security, interdiction of drugs, stepping up on national security issues.
Just spelling off that, when you said stop trying to convince them they're a bad thing, is there any way Canada comes out of this not just unscathed, but possibly ahead in terms of building that better relationship?
I think it's in the short term that's going to be hard to do. Obviously, the relationship has deteriorated at the leader-to-leader level. We need a new prime minister and a new government that are have a gas tank that's full, that's got a 4-year mandate that he can have a constructive dialogue with. And unfortunately, because we have a caretaker government now and with the Liberal leadership, it's awfully hard to do that. We also need to be a lot more ambitious. Increasing a few critical rare earth minerals to exports to the United States ain't going to cut it. We should have soldiers on the border, ensuring that we protect the Canadian-American border. We should have major operations interdicting illegal drugs.
Okay, John Baird, thanks very much.
Great to be with you.
Just to pick up on one point, at a First Minister's meeting last week, several premiers said their industries and resources were on the table in any potential negotiation. The Prime Minister said that no region would be disproportionately affected. Now, Donald Trump has also been pushing to take back the Panama Canal.
The Panama Canal is a monopoly, and so it sets whatever price it wants.
Does the president have a point, and can he do anything about it? Next. Key global trade route the new president says should be in U.S. control.
Panama's promise to us has been broken.
So what does Donald Trump mean, and what can he actually do? Of course, we're talking about the Panama Canal. To break it all down, Andrew Chang, host of CBC News About That, zeroes in on the key aspects and follows the money.
Lately, Donald Trump has been spending a lot of time talking about
the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is a disgrace. We're being ripped off at the Panama Canal.
The Panama Canal even made its way into Trump's inauguration speech, which is supposed to set the tone for his entire presidency.
We have been treated very badly from this foolish gift that should have never been made, and Panama's promise to us has been broken.
He has a lot to say about it, including that the U.S. should retake control of it. And he believes this because he believes the U.S. is being treated unfairly. So, is it? The Panama Canal is one of the most important trade routes in the world because it lets ships cut through Central America rather than going all the way around it. That saves around 3 weeks of travel and thousands of kilometers on a typical journey between Asia and the U.S. East Coast. Now, the United States is by far the Panama Canal's biggest customer. Around 70% of ships that pass through the canal are either coming from or going to the U.S. But when Trump claims that the U.S. is being ripped off by Panama, what does he mean?
The deal was that, they have to treat us fairly. They don't treat us fairly. They violated every aspect of the agreement.
The deal, or the agreement he's referring to there, is this treaty that the U.S. signed more than 4 decades ago to give up the management, operation, and maintenance of the Panama Canal to Panama. The U.S. owned the canal at one point because it built it. Took $375 million and 10 years.
There are plenty of people who feel like the United States, having built the canal and maintained itself as an important customer for the canal, should run the canal.
We built it. We're the ones that use it. They gave it away.
Now, the rationale for why they gave it up is a whole other story. It's complicated. But for Trump, that's the sore spot. The salt in the wound has to do with how much shipping companies pay to use the canal. The treaty that governs it states that the cost for ships to pass through must be just, reasonable, and equitable. And there will be no discrimination against any nation. Trump claims this isn't the case.
They charge more for our ships than do any other ships. The American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form.
But Panama's government says this isn't true. The head of the Canal Authority says this isn't true. They say U.S. ships pay the exact same fees as other nations. And you can see here, the Canal Authority lays out a very detailed list of how its tolls and fees are determined. They consider the type of ship, the ship's capacity, whether the ship arrived on time, how far in advance they booked a slot. So if an American ship is charged more, maybe that's because it's bigger, maybe it was late, or it booked last minute. But what canal authorities don't look at is where that ship is coming from.
The tolls are quite high. They're no higher for U.S. ships, however. The canal treats ships from all countries similarly.
So it's not at all clear what evidence Trump has that U.S. ships are being charged more for being American, because he hasn't offered any. But let's question whether the tolls everyone pays are reasonable. This is a little more subjective. The way this is described in the agreement is that the tolls should be set in a way that reflects the cost of operating and maintaining the canal, which is expensive. Between 2007 and 2016, for example, the Panama Canal Authority invested more than $5 billion US to widen the canal so bigger ships could pass through.
Amplifying the canal was really an investment in securing the canal's future, to make sure that as ships get bigger, those most modern ships would continue to be able to use that route.
So the world has seen an increase in tolls as the cost of operating the canal goes up. And sometimes these are big increases. In 2023, tolls went up a full 10% for some vessels.
They did increase the price of going through the canal pretty substantially in some cases.
So right now, on average, a medium-sized container ship would need to pay somewhere around $280,000 to pass through the canal. For a very large gas carrier, it can be more than $500,000. And consider how oftentimes, slots just aren't even available to transit through. In 2023, during a drought, low water levels put serious restrictions on how ships could flow through. Some tankers were stuck waiting for months. So Panama introduced a new auction system that allowed companies to pay extra if they wanted to get through faster. And there's no limit to how high these auction prices can go. One shipping company in 2023 spent $4 million to skip the line.
The already expensive tolls for crossing the canal can be quite a bit more expensive if you want to jump the line.
And this isn't just a one-off. These days, around a quarter of all transit slots are now put up for auction. Now, these all sound like big numbers, but we still haven't really addressed the precise question of whether these fees are unreasonable. And there are maybe two ways we can look at it. One is to consider the alternative.
Using the canal is extraordinarily convenient. It saves money and it saves time. Otherwise, ships have to travel below the entire continent of South America by Cape Horn.
So on a trip from Hong Kong to New York, for example, the Panama Canal shortcut saves shipping companies an estimated 4,000 nautical miles, or somewhere around 2,500 tons of fuel, depending on the ship's fuel efficiency. At current market prices, that could be more than $1.4 million in savings. So clearly, for most companies, the Panama Canal is still very much worth it. But the other question here is about how much profit the Canal Authority is making beyond what's needed to maintain and operate the canal, and whether that fuels Trump's argument that they're taking advantage somehow. Let's look at 2024. Last year, the Canal Authority's revenue was $5 billion US, but consider, almost 70% of that was profit. And that number has spiked, up 131% over the past 5 years.
In many ways, the Panama Canal is a monopoly, and so it sets whatever price it wants. It's run by the government of Panama, but through a state-owned enterprise that tries to maximize the profitability of the canal.
Now, some of these profits are saved, reinvested, but most of it, about 70% in 2024, went directly to the national treasury.
The Panamanian government relies on revenues from the canal for a significant part of its budget. It's an extraordinarily important asset for Panama beyond its symbolic importance.
Now, to be clear, there's nothing in the U.S. agreement that prohibits Panama from using the canal to generate profit, to make money. In fact, everyone we spoke to said it was expected they would do so. But again, the argument Trump appears to be making is that the tolls the Canal Authority is charging are now much more than what's needed to actually run the canal. And that goes against the spirit of their deal.
They've abused it. They've abused that gift. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated.
So those are the numbers. But let's set that aside, because I think there's a much broader argument that Trump is making that maybe matters even more than the money. And that's
China's basically taken it over. China's running the Panama Canal. See what's going on there? China.
Another core pillar of the Panama Canal's operation is its neutrality. Panama agreed that no country should be able to exploit the canal for military or strategic advantage, something Trump argues is also at risk. The root of his concern comes from these two ports on either side of the canal, both owned by a company based in Hong Kong.
China's at both ends of the Panama Canal. We didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama.
This company is in charge of coordinating the arrival and departures of each ship at its ports, managing the loading and unloading of cargo, and working with the Port Authority on customs clearance and cargo documentation. These things are mainly commercial in nature. But
there are geopolitical concerns within the United States about the extent to which Chinese-based companies control patterns of global trade. And it's not just Trump. Biden administration was really concerned about that kind of competition with China too.
that concern has to do with the power of the ruling Communist Party. Under Chinese law, private companies are required to cooperate with the government if it's deemed necessary for national security. And China defines national security in pretty broad terms: economic security, geopolitical security, domestic security, anything to safeguard the interests of the Communist Party. So having control of two ports in one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet?
It is a legitimate concern because in the case of a conflict between the United States and China, there are fears that this company could interrupt the operations of the canal with pretty significant strategic and economic implications for the United States.
But while Trump may have concerns about the neutrality of the canal, the government of Panama has been clear.
El canal no tiene control directo o indirecto ni de China, ni de la Comunidad Europea, ni de Estados Unidos o de cualquier otra potencia.
So those are the two sides. And maybe now you're asking, if the U.S. has a problem, can they do anything about it? Like, if they feel Panama has in some way violated the decades-old terms of its ownership of the canal, is there some clause that might allow the U.S. to seize the canal back, as Trump says he wants to do? Well, according to everyone we spoke to and the Panamanian government, no, there is no provision that would allow for this. Really, the only way the U.S. could retake control would be through military force, something that Trump has refused to rule out, but which, Adrian, most analysts believe is unlikely, leaving the world with the question, so what now?
All right, thanks, Andrew. Coming up, a literal wild goose chase spanning 7 months.
Once I seen the arrow in him, like 7 months ago, there's just no way I'm going to let that slide.
How one man's commitment finally paid off. Next in our moment. This is a Canada goose given the name Wilson, and yes, that's an arrow in his backside, a trait that helped locals in Squamish, BC keep track of his whereabouts. And those details went to wildlife photographer Tim Sear, who made it his mission to aid that bird. His determination and ultimately success is our moment.
I seen this goose with an arrow sticking in him. I've been following him for about 7 months. We've had 3 or 4 attempts to catch him, no success. He was chased so many times and it was hard catching him, but yeah, we caught him. And then we took him down to the Dewdney Animal Hospital.
He's a Canadian goose. There's no such thing as a non-ornery Canadian goose. So we took the opportunity to sedate him and x-ray him. And so by twisting and pulling, we were able to pull it out. Turns out it's a training arrow. And the funniest thing was they would have mirror in with Wilson's. He was turning around and kind of like, hey, look, I just had a butt lift. On Saturday, he was moved by ferry to Mars Wildlife on Vancouver Island, where he's going to be rehabilitated and eventually released.
Well, we're going to bring him back to Furry Creek. We're going to try to find his flock and release him. I'm very relieved. It's, like I say, he's been part of my day for 7 months, and I have to find something else to do now.
Poor thing. A good thing that was a training arrow. I guess the end is more blunt. It's much safer. And good people there, too. Apparently, the community got together and raised something like $2,600 to help with his rescue and medical needs. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.